perhaps the most important principle in a political landscape that is focused on the morality play condemning the evil of individual action is the evidence that crime is far more concentrated in time and space than among individual offenders. So if you want to go out and fight crime, your opponent is more likely to be places and times and situations than any specific individuals. What I'd like to show you around the concentrations of crimes not over time but in space in Montevideo is the map that would be traditional to what's called a pin map. For every crime in Montevideo, you put in a pin and you get so many pins, it looks like the whole place is covered in crime. But that's entirely an illusion. It's an optical illusion of the altitude you're at. And if instead of doing that, you concentrate the crimes in the hotspots and only show up where crime is likely to recur, to occur more than several times in the course of a year, what you find is that most of the crime is concentrated in a tiny number of places. In fact, only 3% of street segments in Montevideo have 50% of the robberies. Just 3%, about 1,000 street segments in Montevideo out of 33,500 street segments have half of all of the robberies. But what we know is that half the robberies have happened at 1,000 blocks in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. It's the same blocks. And the blocks don't move, but people do. The same places, year by year, have the robberies for the same reasons, which is that they offer the best criminal opportunities, generally because they have concentrations of pedestrians. And pedestrians, at least in some of the analyses we've been doing this week in the crime analysis course for the officers, pedestrians are the most frequent target of robberies, far in excess of buses or stores or other kinds of robbery targets. But to change that equation, we have ample experimental evidence in over 20 tests around the world that substantially increasing by 4 times or 5 times the frequency with which police come and go, and especially in what are called Cobra curve patrols of 15 minutes, which appears to be the optimal time for the police to be there to discourage offenders from committing crimes even after the police are no longer present. That strategy, since June when we brought it into the crime analysis training, has been rolled out in quite a few places. And in July, the 25th District in particular launched the 15 minutes in combination with a substantial increase in the availability of motor vehicles for the police. And they have reversed an increase in robbery they had the first part of the year. And since July 1st, robbery has been going down by substantial margins in that district. This is the kind of information that can be put to work in action and very quickly make a visible difference. This whole approach of targeting places and times leads to the critique of displacement. If you do this, won't crime just move to other places or other times? And the answer, if I may beat around the bush, is no. The evidence from over 150 studies worldwide shows that when offenders are deterred from hotspots and to a great extent hot times, they don't go elsewhere. They're actually afraid of other criminals as much as they are of the police. And if they go to somebody else's hotspot, the offenders may get them before the police do. This is a very powerful deterrent. And we have seen this in Trinidad, as I mentioned the other night at the university, where a substantial increase in patrols in the homicide hotspots has apparently pushed homicide down from 10 a week at the beginning of this year to 2 a week in recent weeks. And with the GPS devices monitoring what the police are doing and where they are patrolling, We are not seeing displacement. We're seeing an absolute reduction in the homicides right across the entire island of Trinidad, which has a population very close to the population of Montevideo. In 1988, we identified the hottest locations in the city based on 2 years of computerized data analysis. We had 110 of them, and we randomly assigned 55 of them to be places where the police had to go and stay there for up to 3 hours a day. Any combination of time, some of them went there, parked, and would read the paper, others would actually get out and talk to people. But when we compared the 55 hotspots that had a lot more police patrol than the 55 where the police would only come through a 911 call, we had a 50% reduction in robbery, where there was additional police. And additional police minutes of being in the hotspot for extended periods of time, which did not depend on arrest. And there's no evidence in any study that increasing the arrest rate of robbers reduces the robbery rate. There's now over 20 studies that shows that if you increase the presence of police in robbery hotspots, you reduce the robbery. If I could wave a magic wand, I would change the age of criminal responsibility upwards to 25. The U.S. Supreme Court has accepted evidence in banning the execution of juvenile murderers. The evidence of neuroscientists that the brain is not fully formed in decision-making until age 25. In Holland, the evidence is that when you put people in prison for the first time before the age of 25, it triples their rate of reconviction compared to a sentence that does not put them in prison. Very similar kinds of people involving thousands of cases. But after the age of 25, the harmful effects of prison disappear. And in fact, on some offenders, you begin to get deterrent effects around age 30 and older years. The problem that societies have to address is the tiny number of young offenders who, very young, like age 11 or 12, who commit very serious crimes and who may need help with post-traumatic stress from their early childhood of abuse or fires or loss of a parent to death, especially by violence. This is what was reported in the Journal of the Royal Statistical Society in 2009. Research I did in Philadelphia with Richard Burke identified this early onset of serious crime in a tiny proportion of offenders as a very powerful lifetime predictor of how dangerous they would be. And so I would like to see policies that invest extremely heavily in young serious offenders. But I don't think those policies can be as crude as lowering the age of responsibility. I was asked about this my last trip in Montevideo, and I think that the complexity of my answer was lost in translation. But I'm happy to clarify it if there's any doubt in your mind what my view is.